In a quiet corner of history, far from the thrones of kings and the clash of armies, lived a man whose name would echo across generations, not for what he conquered, but for what he endured. His story does not begin with miracles or victory, but with stillness. The kind of stillness that comes only from knowing that everything you own, everything you love, everything you hold dear, can be stripped away, and yet your faith does not falter. Prophet Ayoub, known in Christian and Jewish traditions as Job, was a man of great stature. His land was fertile, his herds vast, his children many. His name inspired admiration. People spoke of his kindness, his generosity, and above all, his devotion to God. Unlike some who become arrogant when blessed with wealth, Ayoub remained humble, grateful, and constantly in remembrance of his Lord. His faith was not a shield to be lifted in times of fear, but a constant garment worn in every season. But stories of prophets are never preserved because they had easy lives. They are remembered because their souls were tested in the furnace of suffering and came out shining. Ayoub's test was not a single blow, but a slow erosion of all worldly comfort. His story begins not with tragedy, but with peace. It is that peace which makes what follows so hard to witness. When a man loses everything, how he responds reveals who he truly is. And in Ayoub's case, what was revealed was something extraordinary, a patience so deep, it became a prayer in itself. Before the first trial touched him, before the skies darkened, and the winds of loss began to blow, Ayoub's heart was already prepared. Not because he knew what was coming, but because he had never placed his trust in what could be taken away. In a world where faith is often tied to favor, his story begins with a quiet challenge. Can you love your Lord even when the blessings disappear? Ayoub did, and that is where his story truly begins. Before the winds of hardship stirred, the life of Ayoub was one of quiet abundance. His land stretched wide, green and generous beneath the sun. His flocks roamed the hills like waves of wool and horn, and his household echoed with the laughter of children and the warmth of family. Every corner of his world spoke of ease, not because he chased it, but because it came to him. Yet the blessings he carried never rested on his tongue with pride. They sat quietly in the background, like furniture in the home of a man who knew the house belonged not to him, but to the one who gave it. He was known across the land not only for his wealth, but for his character. Neighbors spoke of his generosity. Strangers told stories of how he welcomed them without question, and the poor never found his door closed. Ayoub was not simply rich in silver or sheep. He was rich in humility, rich in worship, rich in trust. He prayed in the early mornings and gave thanks in the evenings. The world looked at him and said, "Surely this is a man who has earned every good thing." But Ayoub never believed his blessings were a reward. He believed they were a test, a trust. He loved his children dearly, each one a light in his life. His wife was his partner in both ease and devotion. Their home was a place where prayer was not reserved for hardship, and gratitude was not only spoken when the table was full. Ayoub's heart turned to his Lord in every moment. Even when surrounded by joy, he never forgot the giver behind it. There were no signs of trouble in those early years, no omens, no warnings, just the still rhythm of days filled with purpose. Yet even then, he held his wealth with open hands. He taught his children that nothing in this life is truly ours. He reminded them that ease is not the goal, only the space in which one shows thankfulness. And perhaps that is why, when the sky began to dim and the ground grew unfamiliar, Ayoub did not curse the darkness. He had never mistaken the light for his own. His life before the trial was not merely a backdrop to his suffering. It was part of the story, because the strength of his patience would mean little without first understanding the depth of what he had to lose. And what he would one day lose was not only great in measure, but precious in meaning. Yet even in prosperity, Ayoub was already preparing, not in fear, but in faith. And when the first blow came, it did not find him unready. It found a man who had never clung too tightly to the world, because his heart was already anchored somewhere higher. The first sign of change came quietly, as such things often do. A shepherd arrived late one evening, breathless and covered in dust, eyes wide with something more than fear. He spoke of a fire that had come without warning, sweeping across the hills like a beast unchained. The pasture where Ayoub's cattle once grazed was nothing but ash. Not a single animal survived. The servant who brought the news looked as if he expected rage, or panic, or blame, but Ayoub only lowered his gaze and whispered the name of his Lord. Then came another, and another. Messengers, each carrying tidings darker than the last. Bandits had raided the southern pens, stolen the goats and slain the keepers. A sudden storm had torn through the fields, flattening crops ready for harvest. Camels scattered, barns destroyed, wagons overturned. What once took years to build unraveled in the space of a day. By nightfall, Ayoub was no longer a man of means. He was a man with loss stitched into every corner of his name. Yet he did not cry out. His voice did not rise with complaint or demand. Instead, he turned toward the earth and placed his forehead on it. The same dust where his wealth once walked now received his surrender. He said what only the faithful can say in the face of devastation, that to Allah we belong and to Him we return. His hands, once used to give, now empty, folded gently in prayer. He did not ask why. He did not ask how. He simply remained. His wife watched the days grow harder. She saw the servants disappear one by one, the house grow quiet, the storerooms empty. Yet Ayoub's gaze never turned bitter. His words never soured. At times, she wondered how a heart could endure such silence from the heavens. But he would remind her that silence is not absence, that the Lord of the worlds watches still, and sometimes His mercy hides itself in disguise. There was no public mourning, no loud protest to the heavens, only the quiet sound of faith being tested in real time. In a world where value is measured by what a man owns, Ayoub stood stripped of every token of worth, and yet something deeper remained untouched. His character did not shift. His worship did not pause. If anything, his gratitude deepened, not because he enjoyed suffering, but because he recognized it as a chance to prove love beyond reward. It is easy to be grateful when the ground is firm and the hands are full, but it is in the emptying that the soul is revealed. And Ayoub, even in the ruins of his estate, glowed with the kind of patience that made the angels listen. The loss of wealth would have broken another man's spirit. For Ayoub, it only revealed how little he had ever leaned on it to begin with. The loss of wealth could be counted. It could be surveyed, measured, and buried beneath the weight of memory. But the loss that came next struck deeper than coin or cattle. It did not come through fire or wind or thief. It came in silence, and it came for the lights of Ayoub's home, his children. They were the joy of his days, each child a reflection of mercy and promise. Sons and daughters raised with love, laughter, and guidance, taught from the cradle that their breath was a gift and their time a trust. Ayoub had watched them grow in strength and faith, had heard their footsteps echo through the courtyard, and their prayers rise beside his own. Their lives were not perfect, but they were close to his heart, stitched into the very meaning of his world. One day, as they gathered in the eldest son's house for a shared meal, a great wind tore through the region. It came sudden and fierce, a storm that spun the dust of the earth into a weapon. The house shuddered beneath its force, the walls gave way, and the roof collapsed. When the news reached Ayoub, it did not come from many mouths. It came from one, a servant who barely survived, voice shaking, telling of how all the children had perished in an instant. There is no word in any language that can contain the grief of a parent who buries a child, let alone many. No verses prepared Ayoub for that moment. He sat with the weight of it, not like a man broken, but like a man remembering how fragile life has always been. He did not wail, he did not curse. His lips trembled with a single prayer, one that would be carried through the centuries, whispered by the suffering and the faithful alike. He said, "Indeed, adversity has touched me, and you are the most merciful of those who show mercy." Even then, he called upon Allah with his most beautiful name, not judge, not punisher, but the most merciful. That was the space Ayoub chose to remain in. His tears were real, his sorrow was real, but his hope too was real. He did not ask to understand the wisdom, he only asked to be near it. His wife wept beside him. Her strength was slipping, her heart fraying at the edges. She looked to her husband and asked how he could stay so still, how his belief could remain when everything had been taken. And Ayoub, in his calm voice, reminded her that Allah gives and Allah takes, and what is given was never promised forever. It is not the length of the gift that proves love, but the way we return it when asked. The house was quiet now. The laughter of children was only a memory. The walls held no echoes, and the fields lay untouched. Ayoub no longer had the sound of youth around him, but he had something else. A patience that was not passive, but active. A trust that clenched tightly even when the heart was raw. Others began to murmur. They wondered what sin he must have committed to deserve such ruin. But Ayoub knew that trials are not always a mark of punishment. Sometimes they are the marks left on those chosen for something higher. Grief lived with him now, but so did remembrance. And though the second blow had landed harder than the first, he did not let it define his faith. He would carry that grief without letting it darken the light in his soul, because even as he buried his children, he never buried his gratitude. The body, once strong and able, began to wither. What began as a small ache deep in the bones grew into a pain that settled across his limbs like a heavy blanket. Ayoub, once a man whose presence filled a room, who had walked with a steady step through both wealth and grief, now found himself unable to rise from his bed. His skin lost its color, his muscles wasted, and sores opened across his body. The sickness did not pass like a storm. It settled, it lingered, and it made of him a man almost unrecognizable. Those who had once sat at his table now turned their faces when they saw him. Friends slipped away with quiet apologies or no words at all. The same people who had praised his virtue began to whisper that his illness must be a sign. They spoke of divine anger, of some hidden fault, of punishment dressed as suffering. Ayoub never answered them. He did not explain. He did not defend. He simply turned inward, to the only place that still felt whole. The pain was constant. It did not come in waves. It stayed, and with it came exhaustion, silence, loneliness. But Ayoub never allowed despair to take root. Even when his voice became weak and his hands trembled with each breath, he continued to pray. He continued to remember the names of the one who sees all, who hears even what is never spoken aloud. He did not ask to be healed. He asked to be close. His wife remained. She cared for him with hands that had once held harvests and children. Now they tended to wounds and cleaned the space around him. Every day she left the house to work, earning barely enough to bring back food. Each day she returned more tired, more worn, but never without love. Her devotion became the last thread connecting him to the world beyond his bed. Still, Ayoub would not complain, not to her, and not to his Lord. Time stretched. Days became months, and months became years. The home they once filled with prayer and laughter was now quiet, with only the rustle of cloth and the soft sound of whispered remembrance. Ayoub's patience did not wear thin. It deepened. He endured not because he had no choice, but because he chose to trust. His illness had taken his body, but it could not reach his soul. He did not curse his fate. He did not question why others lived in ease while he was made to suffer. Instead, he asked himself whether he still had gratitude, whether he still had the strength to love Allah not for his gifts, but for himself. And even in the shadows of pain, Ayoub found that he did. The final trial had come not with violence but with silence. It stripped him of motion, of strength, of the comfort of others. But in doing so, it revealed what could never be taken. His patience was no longer a choice. It was the shape of his heart, a heart that still turned to the sky, even when the sky gave no answer. Not yet. She rose each morning before the light, gathering what little she could carry, and stepped into a world that no longer welcomed her. Her hands, once soft from tending children, were now calloused from labor. Her name was Rama, and if patience lived in Ayoub's heart, loyalty lived in hers. When others turned their backs, she stayed. When neighbors whispered that the illness in their home was a curse, she kept her eyes on her husband and refused to see anything but dignity. He had once been a man whose generosity clothed villages. Now he could not feed himself, yet she never spoke a word of complaint. She left each morning to find work, sometimes in homes that once stood beneath theirs in wealth and status. She scrubbed floors, carried water, took what she could for the smallest coin. And with that coin, she bought bread and broth, always giving Ayoub the larger portion, pretending she had already eaten. She washed his wounds with tenderness. She held the cup to his lips when his hands failed. Her voice became the sound of comfort when the world grew too quiet. Though the years of grief had left lines beneath her eyes and sorrow in her shoulders, she never asked for release. Her love had not been built on ease. It had been tested in the fire of watching everything fall apart and choosing to stay anyway. Still, there were days when the weight became too much. She had seen her husband lose everything, his land, his health, their children, and yet never once had he asked Allah to relieve him. Not even a single plea for the pain to end. One evening, after returning from another long day of labor, she sat beside him and asked through tears why he would not pray for healing. Had they not endured enough? Was there any shame in asking? Ayoub looked at her, his voice no more than a whisper, and said that he had lived a life of health and wealth for so many years. Why then should he complain if this short time was one of difficulty? Should a servant cry out the moment the balance shifts? Her silence fell heavy. She loved him, but even love can fray beneath the weight of endless strain. One day, desperate and aching, she tried to seek help in a way that Ayoub would not have approved. The details are whispered in old stories, but what is clear is that her action, though rooted in concern, shook something in him. For the first time, Ayoub made a vow. When this trial passed, he said he would strike her with 100 lashes. It was not cruelty. It was not anger. It was the voice of a prophet clinging to the line of obedience, even when his heart broke to speak such words. But Allah knew what lived in both their hearts. And long after the pain was gone and Ayoub was restored, Allah would reveal a way for him to fulfill that vow without causing her harm. In the years of silence and sickness, Rama was more than a wife. She was the echo of his patience, the caretaker of his dignity, the vessel through which loyalty itself was kept alive. Her story does not unfold in loud acts or grand miracles. It lives in the soft repetition of sacrifice, the quiet resilience of a woman who refused to abandon the man she loved, even when the world said she should. In her footsteps, we see a love that did not need comfort to endure. It only needed faith. And in her loyalty, the legacy of Ayoub found its mirror. The day had no thunder. The sky did not open. No one knew it was coming. But after years of silence, of suffering borne without complaint, Ayoub finally raised his voice not in protest, not in despair, but in a whisper that trembled with reverence. He had waited through the loss of his wealth, the burial of his children, the decay of his body, and the slow unraveling of his wife's strength. He had carried it all with a patience so complete that even the angels had watched in awe. But the time had come, not because his endurance had failed, but because he knew that asking was not weakness. It was worship. And so, in the quiet of his pain, Ayoub turned to his Lord. He did not list his wounds. He did not speak of the years. He did not cry out against the injustice. He simply said, "Indeed, adversity has touched me, and you are the most merciful of those who show mercy." No demand followed, no plea for relief, just a statement of truth, offered with the humility of a man who had nothing left but his trust. In that moment, something moved beyond the veil of the unseen. A prayer had passed through the suffering without bitterness, through the years without complaint, and landed at the throne of the most merciful like a drop of water in a still lake. It rippled through the heavens. The Quran does not linger on the moment. It speaks with the same restraint Ayoub used in his dua. So we responded to him, it says, not with delay, not with questioning, just response, immediate, certain. And with that the command was given. Relief had not come because he had finally asked. It came because he had asked without forgetting who he was speaking to. He did not call upon a distant judge. He called upon a merciful friend. And that is why his words carried so much weight, because they came from a heart that had waited not out of pride but out of love. What followed would be remembered as miraculous. But it was this moment, this prayer, that truly shifted the story. It was not loud, it was not dramatic, but it was the sound of patience giving birth to hope, a hope that never demanded, only trusted, a hope that knew, even if nothing changed, Allah was still worthy of being called upon. In that single line of dua, generations would find strength. In those few words, hearts across centuries would remember that the door of mercy never truly closes, and that even the quietest voice can move the heavens when it speaks with truth. The command came as gently as the prayer that had risen. Strike the ground with your foot, Ayoub was told. There was no ceremony, no thunder, only the quiet certainty that follows divine instruction. With the same body that had lain in stillness for years, he moved his foot and tapped the earth beneath him. And from the soil, water rose clear, cool, and unlike anything he had known in his years of suffering. He was told to drink from it and to wash in it. The water, simple in appearance, carried with it a mercy hidden from human understanding. As it touched his lips, strength returned to his limbs. As it washed over his skin, the wounds vanished, the pain dissolved, the years of decay reversed. In the span of moments, the man who had once been left to die was standing, whole, restored, stronger than he had ever been. His wife returned from her daily labor unaware of what had happened. She entered their small, worn space, expecting to find her husband as she had left him. Instead, she saw a man she did not recognize. His skin was smooth, his posture tall, his face radiant with health. She hesitated, confusion in her eyes, wondering if she had entered the wrong place or if her heart had finally broken from hope. But then he spoke her name, and the voice was unmistakable. It was him. Tears came before words. She rushed to him, hands trembling, trying to understand what had happened. Ayoub held her and smiled with the peace of someone who had seen both the fire and the fountain. He told her the truth, not with pride but with awe. Allah had answered, not because they had suffered enough, but because they had turned to him with hearts untainted by bitterness. The miracle was not just in the healing. It was in the way it arrived, with no warning, no audience, no reward except the mercy of the one who had been watching all along. Years of sorrow had been washed away in a single act of divine kindness, and yet the pain had not been wasted. It had prepared them for this moment. It had shaped their gratitude. It had deepened their love. Ayoub stood, not as the man he once was, but as someone remade, not just in body but in spirit. And beside him stood his wife, the one who had never left, the one who had carried him through the darkest hours. Together, they walked forward, not into ease, but into remembrance. Their suffering had passed, but their faith remained, stronger than anything that could be seen or touched. The ground that had once seemed barren now offered water, and in that water lived not just healing, but a reminder that mercy does not always come when you ask, but it never fails to come when you believe. The world that had once turned its back slowly began to turn again. Word spread quietly at first, then with growing wonder. Ayoub was alive. Not just alive, but whole. He walked through the village where no one had dared look him in the eye, and now they could not look away. His skin bore no mark of disease. His eyes held no trace of bitterness. There was no triumph in his step, only peace. The kind of peace that makes people fall silent without knowing why. Allah did not return to him what he had lost in equal measure. He returned more. His fields bloomed with a richness they had never known, the trees heavy with fruit, the pastures full again with animals stronger and healthier than before. It was not just land that came back to him, but abundance layered upon abundance, as if the earth itself was making up for what it had once taken. Then came the children. Whether they were returned or reborn, the accounts differ, but what matters is that once again his home filled with laughter. Their voices ran through the air like music, echoing off walls that had once only held silence. His wife, who had carried grief longer than anyone should, now cradled joy in her arms again. The years of sorrow softened into memory, not erased but no longer sharp. They sat in the past like shadows at the edge of sunlight. The promise of Allah had been fulfilled not just in relief, but in restoration. And Ayoub did not forget. His prayers remained steady. His hands continued to give. His voice still carried the gentleness of a man who had known pain and found purpose within it. When asked about his trials, he never spoke of suffering with anger. He spoke of it like a season that had passed, one that had watered his soul until it bloomed again. The vow he had made to his wife during the hardest years lingered in his heart. But Allah, in His mercy, revealed a way for Ayoub to honor it without harm. He was told to take a bundle of grass, 100 slender stalks bound together, and strike her once with it. In this, he kept his word without ever raising a hand in anger. It was a gesture full of love, not judgment, a command fulfilled in mercy, just as their story had been. Ayoub's story did not end in sorrow. It ended in a kind of beauty that only comes after the deepest trials. His patience was not rewarded with ease alone, but with a closeness to Allah that ease alone could never bring. He became known not just as a prophet, but as a servant who proved what it means to trust. And in the fullness of his blessings, he never let go of the silence that had shaped him. Gratitude had been his companion in loss, and now it walked beside him in every step of his return. His story did not remain in the soil of his land. It traveled. It found its way into hearts across generations, carried not by scholars alone, but by those whose pain left them searching for meaning. Ayoub became more than a man. He became a reminder. In his quiet, in his endurance, in his whispered prayer, people heard something that felt like their own voice. A voice too tired to cry out, but still strong enough to believe. The Quran speaks of him with tenderness. Truly, we found him patient. What better praise can be given to a soul than to be called patient by the one who sees all things? Not patient in silence for the sake of pride, not patient because there was no other choice. Patient because his love for his Lord was never tied to what he was given, and never broken by what was taken away. In a world that moves quickly, where hardship often brings resentment and ease is mistaken for favor, Ayoub reminds us of something deeper, that faith is not about comfort, it is about trust. That the value of a life is not in how long it was easy, but in how steady it remained when it was not. He reminds us that suffering does not always mean distance from God. Sometimes, it is the very way by which we draw near. For those who have lost health, or wealth, or family, Ayoub offers no quick answers. He does not teach how to avoid pain. He teaches how to carry it, with grace, with humility, with a heart that still turns upward even when the sky seems closed. He teaches that dua does not have to be loud. It does not have to be eloquent. It only has to be sincere. His words were few. His hope was vast. There are moments in every life when the world goes quiet, when what once made sense no longer does. In those moments, Ayoub's story stands like a lamp. It does not remove the dark, but it shows a way through it. And even now, when someone whispers a prayer in the night, asking for mercy while holding back tears, the same door that opened for Ayoub still waits to open again. He lived a life marked by loss, but remembered for faith. He waited not because he was powerless, but because he believed in a mercy greater than the moment. And when the time came, that mercy answered, not just for him, but for every soul who would one day sit with their sorrow and remember the one who never let it make him bitter. Ayoub's legacy is not buried in the past. It lives in the quiet strength of those who choose love when they could choose anger, who choose trust when they could choose despair. His story is not one of miracles alone. It is one of the heart, and it will remain, as long as there are hearts that still call upon the most merciful.